the Point World Affairs, I'm Cha-Sang Lee. North Korea and the U.S. have reached an agreement to arrange a second summit meeting between Kim and Trump, following U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's fourth visit to Pyongyang. But the November midterm elections and an unwillingness from both Pyongyang and Washington to make further concessions still remain obstacles in moving the denuclearization talks forward. How is President Trump's policy towards North Korea being evaluated in the U.S.? And how will this assessment affect future talks? For that, we have with us Dr. Lee Sung-yeon, the Director of the Department of Unification Strategy Studies at Sejong Institute. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
Before we jump into the questions, let's take a look at the latest developments.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's fourth visit to North Korea on September 7th has resulted in yet another progress in U.S.-North Korea relations as the two countries have reached a deal after their 3.5-hour meeting.
So is everything okay?
Everything's great. Everything's great. I'm very much looking forward to our time together too.
사이의 그 좋은 앞날을 기약해 볼 수 있는 물론 조심스럽지만 기약해 볼 수 있는 그런 좋은 날이라고 생각합니다.
After meeting with Chairman Kim, Pompeo flew over to South Korea and visited President Moon Jae-in to share what was discussed and the results of the meeting.
폼페이오 장관님의 방북과 앞으로 곧 있을 제2차 미국 정상회담이 한반도의 역화와 평화 프로세스에서 되돌아갈 수 없는 결정적인 진전을 만들어내는 좋은 계기가 되기를 기대합니다.
But we had a good, productive conversation. As President Trump has said, there are many steps along the way, and we took one of them today. It was another step forward, and so this is, I think, a good outcome for all of us.
North Korea also highlighted Pompeo's visit in its daily Dongchangri newspaper and added that its leader is determined to achieve the goals proposed in the Singapore summit in June. Accordingly, there are growing expectations for a second Kim-Trump summit, which is likely to take place after the U.S. November midterm elections. What's to note is that there will be working-level talks between Stephen Biegun, the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, and Choi Sun-hee, a senior North Korean diplomat, who will discuss the specific schedule and agenda of the summit. On this week's The Point World Affairs, we take a closer look at the details surrounding the imminent second Kim-Trump summit and the possibility of a big deal between the two countries.
Now, Dr. Lee, the question that everyone has been asking, when is this second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un take place? Well, President Trump said that it will be held after the U.S. midterm election. That's November 6th, I know. So did this surprise you?
Well, I think it's better that way because if you remember the previous summit, lots of analysts expressed that there was not much substance while there was some PR effect. The appearance was good, but they want to see more substance. So, and they need time to prepare with that substance. So it's better to have a time to prepare preparation. At the same time, I think midterm elections are very important for the United States. Midterm elections are like a midterm exam. When you have an exam, you need to stay at home and prepare for the exam. But we'll see what happens after the exam. Because Trump said that he fell in love with Kim Jong-un. So some people joke that because he fell in love with Kim Jong-un, he might skip the midterm election and probably go out for a date with Kim Jong-un. But I think Trump showed a sense of rationality at this time.
So you're saying that there could be some changes to this decision, this announcement that he made?
I think he just settled the public narrative of there are so much expectations about because the DPRK US summit is like a world event, and there are a lot of speculations. And I think he just made it very clear that the show will happen after the midterm elections.
I understand. And you just mentioned an interesting analogy to preparing for the midterm exam. And just like that, the preparation actually has been going very serious between Washington and Pyongyang. And not a big step, but there definitely was a step forward and a lot of developments between the two countries. But how do you think this progress will affect the midterms?
Let me put it this way. It's a slow but steady progress, depending on your perspective. I just came from a conference where lots of American scholars, we just debated about this issue, and they complained that the speed of progress is too slow. But at the same time, I think compared to last year, where we are on the brink of war, now moving toward peace and then denuclearization, it might be slow, but we are heading into the right direction.
How about after the summit? Whether President Trump and his Republicans come out as winners from these midterms, would this actually affect the nuclear talks in the future?
If I were Kim Jong-un, I hope that Trump wins, of course. And if I were Kim Jong-un, and I think probably Kim Jong-un needs to speed up the process of denuclearization, because midterm is, in a way, halfway in the middle of a presidency, and the president is heading to the downhill in a sense, unless he is also preparing for another term. So, and there are a lot of, he will face more domestic resistance in terms of if, in case he loses the election, also including his initiative toward North Korea, there will be a lot of opposition resistance. So it'll definitely have some impact. But if Trump wins the midterm elections, I think he will be more confident, and he will pursue the policies that he personally is emotionally attached. For example, like the North Korean issue. North Korean issue was really a rare window of opportunity to resolve once and final the North Korean nuclear issue, because this is the first sitting U.S. president who takes North Korean issue very seriously and put that as the #1 priority in his foreign policy. So this is a golden opportunity for Kim Jong-un to give up nuclear weapons and join the international community. The conference that I just coming from, there was a speaker who was H.R. McMaster, the former national security advisor under Trump, the immediate previous national security advisor. He had advice to Kim Jong-un, and he said, "Don't lose this opportunity, Kim Jong-un." And I also agree with him that this probably will be very important, at the same time, probably the last opportunity for North Korea to come out, because not just the U.S. attitude that you mentioned about the midterm elections and afterwards, probably the domestic situation in the United States may change, but at the same time, people don't mention about the domestic situation in South Korea as well. Particularly, there is a demographic changes. For example, people in their 40s and 50s, including me, I mean, we have empathy, sympathy toward North Korea. We are brothers. North Korea doesn't behave well, but we are estranged brothers. We need to reunify together. But I think younger generation in the 20s and 30s, I don't think they like Kim Jong-un. They don't like the dictatorship. They don't like the human rights violations. They are less willing to give sympathy to the Kim Jong-un regime. And if you see the polls in South Korean domestic, the younger generation, I think they are more don't find affinity with a regime like North Korea. So if time progresses, when there is another next generation, probably North Korea and South Korea, the younger generation, they lose each other in terms of their shared sense of ethnicity and one nation. So this is a very important opportunity. I think probably this decides the future of the Korean Peninsula. So this is a very important opportunity that Kim Jong-un really shouldn't lose this opportunity.
Besides laying out the groundwork for a second summit with North Korea, Mike Pompeo has made another deal with the North Korean leader. That is, to invite a group of outside inspectors to verify whether the Punggye nuclear test site, which was blown up back in May, has indeed been permanently destroyed. While this has been hailed as progress by some, others are saying North Korea is simply selling the same horse twice, as it should have done this 6 months ago. In fact, while President Trump is promoting his Singapore talks with North Korea as his biggest diplomatic achievement, there's mounting criticism that the U.S. is being deceived by Pyongyang's unpredictable tactics. However, some say if inspections at the Punggye site come out positive, many opinion leaders in the U.S. may change their perception of North Korea. What's more, expectations are growing as Pompeo reportedly had in-depth discussions with Chairman Kim on the denuclearization of the Dongchangri missile test site and Yongbyeong nuclear facilities as well. We connect to a military expert in the U.S. to hear his opinion regarding current U.S. policy toward North Korea and what steps it would need to take to end deep-rooted distrust toward the North.
Let's hear more about Secretary of State Pompeo's most recent trip to Pyongyang. We connect with Toby Dalton, the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Welcome.
Hey, nice to see you.
Pompeo hailed his meeting with Kim Jong-un as a success, saying that North Korea has agreed to open up the Punggye nuclear test site to international inspectors for them to verify that it was really demolished back in May. How meaningful is this gesture?
Well, it's significant insofar as it allowed the visit of Secretary Pompeo to be cast as a success in keeping this process going. But we have to remember that this is something that the North Koreans have promised to do before. Even when they went to the extent of trying to destroy the site, they had purportedly invited inspectors, then went back on that, only invited journalists. So this is an issue that isn't exactly new, a promise that isn't exactly new, and we have to see yet how it might actually be carried out before I think we can say that it's really significant.
Previously, South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa had proposed that the U.S. hold off on their plan to demand for an inventory of North Korean weapons in exchange for the end-of-war declaration as they accept the verified disarmament of the Yongbyeong facility. So what's your thought on that?
Well, this is the so-called declaration for declaration proposal, and it is notable that in Secretary Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang and then afterwards, there really has not been much discussion about the North Korean nuclear declaration. So this issue seems like it's either been moved to the back burner, or they've decided that they need to focus on something else first. Now, whether that means that they're focused on the proposal that Foreign Minister Kang gave, focused on Yongbyeong or not, I don't know. It's too early to say. And if you read carefully the statements that Secretary Pompeo made, he was very careful to say that he wouldn't talk about the discussions on Yongbyeong. So I think it seems like that is a proposal designed to keep this process moving forward and not get hung up so much on a requirement that North Korea tell us everything about its nuclear and missile programs up front. Whether we're actually going down that road or not, it's a little hard to tell today.
Dr. Dalton, about this list of North Korea's weapon inventory, how significant is it for the U.S. and the international community to get a grasp of what's the real situation there?
Right now, the U.S. and others are looking for some signs of real intent that North Korea wants to make good on this commitment to denuclearization. And so the declaration was seen as a sign that they're really serious about it, because it would involve a fair amount of risk for North Korea to declare all of these facilities, to include some, presumably, that remain secret. So I think from that standpoint, it is critically important as a signal of intent. It's also really critical that if we're going to have confidence that indeed North Korea has shown us everything that there is to see, that they're not hiding weapons or facilities or material in other places, then the declaration has to be internally consistent. You have to match records of production of plutonium or highly enriched uranium from Yongbyeong and perhaps other facilities with the numbers of nuclear weapons they have. You have to match numbers of missiles that they declared, that they produced, with the ones that you actually can observe. And so that kind of matching of records is really critical. Is it critical to do today when we're still trying to get this process moving forward? I'm not so sure. I think that Foreign Minister Kang's suggestion of trying to find confidence in declaring one facility, inviting inspectors, freezing that facility, and then perhaps moving on to others, that is another way to go. It's just not the traditional one that most arms control and nuclear experts tend to favor.
The corresponding measures that Pyongyang has repeatedly been saying, commentators has been talking about this. Nobody really knows exactly what they want. But before offering anything, Washington seems to want something from Pyongyang. But what does the U.S., more likely the Trump administration, really want from Pyongyang?
Well, that's kind of the million-dollar question. And I think a lot of the pessimism that you see from some of my colleagues here in Washington is not only about what North Korea may or may not be willing to do, but also its criticism of the Trump administration foreign policy. And in particular, I think there was a sense that there was some possibility of actually making real progress on denuclearization, but that the president gave away too much leverage in the summit in Singapore, and that eroded some of the leverage that the U.S. had built through the maximum pressure campaign of sanctions. So I think you have to kind of see the criticism or the skepticism, if you will, as both skeptical of North Korea's willingness, having now achieved a nuclear weapons capability, to pivot on a dime and give up that capability in a short period of time just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's also skepticism, I think, of the extent to which the Trump administration really has the ability to craft a coherent foreign policy agenda with North Korea and apply it. So I think that's why you're hearing the skepticism on both sides. Now, what would the U.S. be willing to give up? On the one hand, the administration seems to have said very strongly that the sanctions are going to remain in place until North Korea completes denuclearization. That could be a long time. And of course, the sanctions really require strict implementation to include by parties in the region, most notably China and Russia, in order to have the greatest effectiveness. If other parties in the region are now thinking that those sanctions should be relaxed a little bit, then that undermines the effectiveness of those sanctions and means that the practical effect of relaxing sanctions at the UN probably has less meaning. But I think North Korea will be looking for some statement of intention from the U.S. or active intention that it plans to carry forward. So maybe there's one or two sanctions, perhaps on individuals or something that might be relaxed. But trying to discern where the Trump administration is on this question is quite difficult.
Let's connect to another expert for more analysis. We have Charles Armstrong, professor of Korean Studies at Columbia University. Good to see you, Professor.
Nice to be with you.
Many American experts seem not only dissatisfied with North Korea's promises, but also with the U.S. policy tackling denuclearization. So why do you think President Trump's policy is not so popular at home?
Well, there's a lot of resistance to or criticism of President Trump in general. So, there are a lot of people, especially in the kind of foreign policy community, who are quite critical of him. So I think that's part of it. But I also think that there's a lot of resistance to moving quickly on improving relations with North Korea within foreign policy circles, among scholars, and so on. But my own view is President Trump has some good instincts about how to move forward on North Korea, and that any reduction in tension in North Korea and any communication between the U.S. and North Korea should be encouraged.
How about Pompeo's recent trip to Pyongyang? It was his fourth visit to Pyongyang, but he hasn't really come up with an official announcement on the logistics of the next second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. But how about your thoughts and local sentiment on this process after Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang?
There has been a lot of criticism in the American media about how little Secretary of State Pompeo got from the North Korean side, but I think he's right that there has been progress, maybe not a lot of progress. A lot of details need to be worked out, but things are moving forward. The North Korean side has said they will allow inspectors in to take a look at the Punggye missile testing site, they suggested that they may have people look at the Yongbyeong nuclear plants. And there's continued affirmation of the goal of denuclearization and desire for a second summit meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. So this is going to be a long and difficult process. And I think that Secretary of State Pompeo has been fairly open about that, and others in the administration have as well. And President Trump himself has been not as eager to announce that there have been great achievements made. So we are moving forward slowly, but it seems steadily.
Now, this midterm election, many commentators have been linking a lot of foreign policy or trade deals that Trump has been pushing for, such as the recently signed NAFTA deal and trade disputes with China. They have been linking this with the midterms. But North Korean issue is definitely not an exception. So how significant is the linkage between the midterms and the North Korean issue?
Well, both sides, that is, both the North Korean side and the U.S. side are looking at the midterm elections. I think on the North Korean side, they're concerned that Trump will be weakened if there's a big Republican loss at the midterms, and they want to make sure that Trump is able to deliver on his promises as long as he's in office. And on the U.S. side, President Trump is very interested in getting something going while he's president, and whether or not there is success for the Republicans in the midterm. So there is concern about the effects of the midterm, particularly a major Republican loss of the midterm, on slowing down the momentum toward U.S.-North Korean improvement of relations. But the North Koreans have a much longer time frame. They don't have to worry about elections and coming out of office. So they want to try to push things forward so the next president can continue building on what Trump has done.
Thank you, Professor Armstrong from Columbia University, for joining us today. Dr. Lee, so how do you read Professor Armstrong's analysis on the connection between the midterms and the North Korean issues?
Midterm elections, Charles Armstrong said that North Korea can play the long-term game. I don't think so, because there is still a brooding sense of the remaining option, that is military option the U.S. has against North Korea. If Trump feels that he is betrayed by North Korea, I think this option can be back on the table. I think because China, like other countries like China and Russia, they felt that if they strongly oppose military option against North Korea and demand that from the United States, they thought that U.S. will not be able to attack North Korea. But actually, last year, U.S. was planning to attack North Korea despite the strong oppositions from two other major powers in the world, China and Russia. That means that Trump doesn't care about what China thinks, what Russia thinks about. I think this is something, a new dynamic that we are watching. So Trump says that I fell in love with Kim Jong-un, but when he feels that he was betrayed by Kim Jong-un, probably the love will transform into hate. And Trump has this presidential authority that doesn't have to declare a formal war against North Korea, but then he could still have a means of embarking on military attack against North Korea. So I think this is, again, a reminder to Chairman Kim Jong-un that time is not necessarily on your side. So you have to be very serious about denuclearization. This is a golden opportunity. This could be a winning opportunity between you and Trump. My request or my advice for South Korean government is that given the prevailing pessimism in Washington, D.C., it was good that President Moon Jae-in went to Washington, New York and met with Washington think tanks, public diplomacy. Also, the Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa interviewed with these days with American media outlets, so that let them know what we are thinking about. Also, let them know we are not naive. I think this also shares some of the information that is being that's developing. my conversation with some of the American analysts these days that they, even though they attend some of these conferences, but probably more than 90% of the information is from their reading media news outlets. I don't think that is enough. I think there are lots of more things happening, and probably we are not sharing enough with our American colleagues. So this kind of outreach effort is very much important so that Washington is also on the same page with South Korea.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on the developments between all these countries. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Relations between the relevant parties seem to be amicable ahead of the second Kim-Trump summit, but it remains to be seen if that can be sustained throughout the negotiating process. That's all we have for this week's The Point World Affairs. Thanks for tuning in, and see you again next week.